This is Indian Country Today.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahan. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. Citizens of tribes across the U.S. cried and clapped in celebration Monday as Deb Haaland became the first Native American confirmed as a secretary of a cabinet agency. The U.S. Senate voted 51-40 in favor of the Democrats' nomination to lead the Interior Department, which manages millions of acres of land and has broad oversight of tribal affairs and energy development. Many Native Americans rallied behind her confirmation, saying it's a long-awaited answer to their prayers and that it puts someone they trust in a position to carry forward their hopes and expectations. Haaland gathered with her sisters, her partner, and Democratic U.S. Representative Sharice Davids of Kansas to watch the vote from Haaland's home in Washington, D.C. They planned to eat spaghetti to celebrate, and Haaland joked that she needed to run to the store for more tomatoes before her security detail realized she had been confirmed as the next Interior Secretary. The Biden administration is making another high-level appointment of a Native American. This time, it's at the Agriculture Department. Janie Hipp will be that department's general counsel. Hipp is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma and chief executive of the Native American Agriculture Fund. In addition to being an expert on agriculture and food, she comes from a family of farmers. She recently talked about that experience with Indian Country Today.
But I remember as a child, a time when all the farmers where we were, people would hang with them. And, you know, if something came through your land and you had a bad hailstorm, the people in your community would rally around you and stay with you. Why? Because they knew that you were growing the food that was going to help feed them. And we as a society broadly just don't do that anymore.
If Hipp is confirmed by the Senate, she will join Deb Haaland and more than half a dozen other Indigenous people appointed to high-level positions by the Biden administration. March 15th marks the one-year anniversary and one-day anniversary since the Blackfeet Nation in Montana declared a reservation-wide state of emergency due to the pandemic. Now, tribal leaders are ushering in a new normal under the third phase of a reopening plan that has been one of the most strict and uncompromising in the nation. They permanently lifted a state of emergency that includes restrictions far more intensive than those required either by the Montana statewide mandate or by local decree. James McNeely is the Blackfoot Public Information Officer. He says even though they are opening, they are remaining cautious.
Well, getting from point A to point B was not easy. We're not letting our guard down, though, by any means. We're just loosening up some of the things for people's mental well-being, physical, spiritual, emotional, psychological means to get some fresh air out there, but being safe about it.
Phase 3 does not lift masking requirements and maintains other public health guidelines. Currently, the nation has 2 active COVID cases. One tribe is working with architects to design a COVID-era school. The Sweetgrass First Nation in Saskatchewan, Canada, is taking into account a land-based learning approach, which is rooted in traditional ways of life. With in-class learning disrupted by coronavirus cases and schools having to turn to online instruction, educators are looking to land-based learning to teach kids in a way that manages risk and also provides a quality experience. The school will include an outdoor classroom and teaching garden. Students will learn how to tan animal hides and play games. Additionally, designed rooms will offer elders culturally appropriated space to do their teachings. The federal government's COVID-19 guidance for schools recommended increased ventilation and dedicated $75 million to making upgrades to facilities across Canada. More than half of Saskatoon schools need upgrading and are approaching the end of their lifespan, with 57 of 83 needing to be replaced in the next 3 to 5 years. Tokabi Restaurant will soon become a national retail brand. The Denver-based concept is becoming a distributor of the native products it already buys. Since 2008, the founders Ben Jacobs and Matt Chandra have been highlighting the food of Native people. The menu includes native foods such as wild rice, quinoa, and wheat berries. The protein comes from bison or beans and garnishes of Osage hominy, seed mixes, green chilies, or different salsas, along with an elderberry vinaigrette. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Mark Trahan. When we come back, we'll take a look at the foster care system and how it helps Native children. Stephanie Benally is the Native American specialist at Utah Foster Care. Utah Foster Care is a nonprofit that recruits, trains, and supports foster parents. She has been working diligently to recruit more Native American foster parents in the state of Utah. In November 2020, Utah Foster Care launched an Indian Child Welfare Act alert system. The Indian Child Welfare Act created special protections for Indian children in the child welfare system. One of the Child Welfare Act protections is placement preferences for Indian children in foster care and adoption placements to keep them with their communities and their culture. Welcome, Stephanie Benally.
Thank you for having me on the show today.
Tell us about what are the biggest challenges of your work and how to recruit Native parents?
So I've been with Utah Foster Care for over 4 years, and I found that there was a lot of misconceptions about what foster care is, and that people weren't aware that there was a need for Native foster homes. And so just going out into the community, working with our 8 partners and community partners to make people aware that there is a need. A lot of the barriers that we found were the application process. So explaining to them about, the process step by step, and then just being available as they go through that process. Also, a question we always ask is, can there be a multi-generation household for people to foster? You can be a multi-generation household. And so just like general, requirements to become a foster parent. Background checks is another barrier. So we've are working to make the community aware of the process and then the awareness that we do need more Native foster homes. And when we go out into the community, we not only are looking to recruit for people to become licensed through the state, but also through the tribe. So we're, across the board, we're sharing that information nationwide. There is a shortage. And if they can't foster through the state or become licensed through the state, then, contact their tribe.
Why do you think there is a national shortage?
I think it's the barriers that people see, and just that, the misconceptions of what foster care is. I know there was a lot of questions at the beginning when I began this work about comparing it to the placement program. And so just making them aware of, when a child comes into care, the number one goal is reunification. The state does try, and stresses that the goal is they want the child to come back to the family if that's a safe home to return to. And so I believe that's, those barriers, and then also just the awareness that there is a shortage.
You mentioned the child placement program, and in the Rocky Mountain states, that certainly has its own history, but that was primarily non-Indian families, correct?
Yes.
And so the whole idea of bringing Native families to Native families has a unique power.
Yes, it is. Yes.
What are the challenges? Is there a short-term process and a long-term process, or is it the same system?
So every state is different. In Utah, to become a licensed foster parent, we just need to set up an initial consultation, go over the process of foster care. And then during that interview, we also talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act, letting the potential foster parent know of the placement preferences and that there's a federal law to protect Native American children. And then after that would be our pre-service training that the parents will complete, along with the application and required documents. And then a home study would be completed, and then that would be the licensure process. So that's the process to become a licensed parent. To be a kinship placement, you would need to pass a background check, a walk through the home, and then complete one training class.
And how is the kinship, how do they measure that? So
the tribe would make that determination. So for example, with the ICWA alert that was launched last year, that's looking for an immediate kinship home. So when we have information, for example, of a child who's Navajo, we have their clans, we get the information from the potential parent, their clans, and then we give that to the state and to the tribe. And then Navajo Nation will then decide if there's a relationship between the Navajo kids and the potential Navajo parents. And then if there is, then the state can go forward and place the children in that home as a kinship placement.
We now have 40 years of the Indian Child Welfare Act, so we have a lot of more than 40 years. So we now have a lot of good data about how families and children grow up. Maybe talk about your experiences with that.
So when we go out to the communities, we give information about the Indian Child Welfare Act and why there's a federal law for our Native children. And so we share that with the community and then also with our licensed foster parents so they understand why there's a placement preference and why it's important to be able to place Native kids in Native homes. And so we do that through presentation. I partner with Lisa Lee, the Indian Child Welfare Administrator with DCFS in Utah. And then we also do film screenings to create the dialogue about the Indian Child Welfare Act. And so we're continuously sharing that information with the community and with our foster parents.
There are just so many misconceptions about the Indian Child Welfare Act. What's some of the ones you encounter all the time?
How it only applies to certain genders. So if you're a male, it only applies to males. And then also that it's a race-based law. And so just educating people that it is not, and that it applies to children that are under the age of 18 and they're either enrolled or eligible for enrollment. And so it's just explaining that to the community about what it is and why it exists.
Well, and the other part of it is that so many people think it's automatic that the decision will be made rather than going through a judicial process that's very similar to that the state would go through.
Yeah.
I'm wondering when you meet, right now the Indian Child Welfare Act has been just under tremendous pressure from political groups. In Utah, how do you explain the importance of it to folks beyond Indian country?
Well, as an agency, Utah Foster Care supports the Indian Child Welfare Act. We submitted an amicus brief when, as the lawsuit came out of Texas. And so as an agency, we support it. We let the community know that we support it. And then again, we share that with in our training, with our potential parents, with licensed parents, and with the community that as an agency, it is important. Again, it's a federal law to protect our kids and why it exists, and it's to have the kids remain within their culture, to be culturally connected. That's it's important. So we share that information.
I'm sure after the dedication of your work has been that you've got success stories in your mind. Maybe tell us without details just about those success stories.
So when I go to the community, I meet with different people who are interested in becoming foster parents. Some who, there is a one time where I went out and did an information table, and a woman came up and shared that she had her children removed from her home, and she worked hard to be able to get her kids back. And the kids that were around my information table were her kids, and they had, they were happy, they were excited to be there, and just for, hearing her story and hearing what she went through, and being happy to be able to have her kids home. That's what we're working for. The state does give the opportunity for parents to work to try to get their kids back. And that does happen when we share that information. Reunification, whether they go back to their birth parents or to a relative, happens 65% of the time in the state of Utah. And so we share that information, and we let people know that that is the number one goal.
Well, and the flip side is you see so many cases of social problems, and it traces back to not having a safe home.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the removal of the kids are due to neglect or abuse.
And when they do find, how long does it often take to bond with a family and to try to get back onto some sort of routine?
So when the child comes into care, they're typically, we tell the potential parents that the typical stay is about a year, depending on what's going on with that case. And so, some parents, they bond quickly with the child. Sometimes it takes a while for the child to get comfortable with the environment. And so I always stress, patience is needed with our kids. And that's why it's important to be able to try to place our kids with Native families, because they are able to, as they're going through, the trauma, they're going to be able to relate to somebody through language, through culture, through food. And so that's why it's important to be able to place our kids in Native homes.
And that really shows the resiliency of Native children. Thank you, Stephanie Benally.
Thank you for your time.
And we'll be right back. Aliyah Chavez has been covering every twist and turn in this election year, and that includes the confirmation yesterday of Representative Deb Haaland as the next Interior Secretary. Aliyah Chavez, tell us about this incredible story.
Incredible is the only way to describe it. For the first time in US history, an Indigenous woman is the caretaker of the nation's public lands and waters. And yesterday, incoming Interior Secretary Deb Haaland was confirmed by the US Senate in a 51 in favor and to 40 vote, 40 were opposed. And most notably, there was actually a handful of Republican senators who broke from party lines to vote for her. Those were Republican senators Susan Collins of Maine, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan of Alaska. So definitely a few surprises there, but all in all, we can say that Deb Haaland was confirmed and will soon be sworn in officially after she resigns from her seat in Congress.
I want to ask you about the process a little bit, but the pressure from Alaska Natives was pretty intense on both senators from Alaska, and it really shows the growing political power of Native votes.
That is very true. Actually, yesterday, Senator Dan Sullivan released a statement after he voted in favor of Deb Haaland's confirmation, and he said that it was one of the hardest votes he had ever had to make as a senator. And so when you're putting that into perspective, senators vote all the time, and when someone says this is one of the hardest votes that I've ever had to decide, it really puts into perspective how big of a deal this was, and especially in a state like Alaska, sort of what the repercussions could be now that she's been confirmed.
On a Facebook congratulatory session last night, she talked about her new security detail and how her life has changed. What's kind of the process for the Secretary of Interior now?
It's very interesting. I actually just learned before we hopped on here that Representative Haaland, since she still is technically a US representative, will be giving her farewell remarks on the House floor on Tuesday morning. And so there, I imagine she'll give a speech saying, thank you for the service that I've done. Thank you to all of the people that I've worked with. And after that, she had mentioned yesterday in that public watch party that she will resign from her seat as a New Mexico representative, which then in turn will sort of trigger a whole process for a special election this spring in New Mexico to fill her seat. But after she resigns, she can then therefore be able to be sworn in, we're guessing either Wednesday or Thursday by Vice President Kamala Harris.
There's an old joke in the West that it doesn't matter who the president is, it's who's the Secretary of Interior, because the Secretary of Interior controls more land than governors, more land really than any other single person in the United States.
That's something that we reported on yesterday. She's actually 8th in line in succession of the presidency, and really has a lot of power when she is sworn in, of course, as Interior Secretary. And that's definitely something I'm sure a lot of us will be watching.
And one of the things you're seeing both at the Interior Department and the Agriculture Department is that it's not just Native Americans at the top of the chain, but throughout the government, you're seeing some really key appointments.
Definitely. And that's something that, we were sort of anticipating, at least in Indian country. I think a lot of people were cautiously optimistic when President Biden was a candidate for president. He said he wanted a diverse cabinet. He wanted diversity that reflect the diversity of America. And so now we're seeing that come to fruition. And as you mentioned, it's not just these high level positions, it's sort of up and down in terms of a lot of federal agencies.
What about the Congress? We had a record number with 5 in the Congress. What does this mean for her seat and for the caucus, I guess?
I think it's really interesting. There's actually an Acoma Pueblo woman, so really just down the road from where Deb Haaland is from at Laguna, who's a state legislator and an attorney, and she's actually running to fill Representative Haaland's seat. And so this spring, when the special election happens, we'll follow closely for Georgine Lewis, who's the candidate in New Mexico.
Thank you, Aliyah Chavez.
Thanks, Mark.
And be sure to read her work at IndianCountryToday.com. And now for a look at the tradition of ice fishing. It's a skill passed down in the families for many tribal nations. It's a time to come together, enjoy the cold, and fish to feed their families. Caitlin Onawa Boisel put up her Gone Fishing sign to catch this story.
I'm standing on the frozen waters in northeastern Wisconsin, where underneath my feet are plenty of fish just waiting to be caught.
They're waiting for a fish to come up.
It's a sunny day, just about 25 degrees, right off the Forest County Potawatomi Reservation, where local ice fishermen are setting up to catch their first prey.
Or every time we go out, it's either me and him, or otherwise a few other people with us.
And the craft grew.
From like a hobby to a straight up passion.
But fishing is more than a passion for Ryan Alloway. His tribe, the Forest County Potawatomi, know these waters and ice well.
My people are mostly fishermen, because they were all a part of one tribe called the Algonquin a long time ago. When they were up there, they lived around like Sault Ste. Marie and all the Great Lakes up through there. And there was the chief, like the leader. And he had 3 sons, the Bodewatami, the Odawa, and the Ojibwa. And I think he had a vision of something about like an invader coming or something. So then he sent his 3 sons, he told them go west. That's where it's safe, go west. So the Odawas, they went up north through Canada. The Chippewas kind of followed them going up through the UP into northern Wisconsin and up into Minnesota. And my band, they went down and they settled around like the Milwaukee area, southern Lake Michigan, all the way up into Door County. And then when Andrew Jackson signed the Native American Removal Act in 1830, it was their goal to move every Indian west of the Mississippi or east, whatever it was. But my people, we ran, we like scattered.
Today, the Forest County Potawatomi Reservation is 12,000 acres. Ryan's great-grandfather, Ike George, worked on this lake as a guide from 1950 to 1970. He relied on traditional knowledge to find fish, like knowing that cloudy days mean more of a catch.
Felt like I could like almost feel my grandpa's spirit in me sometimes when I'm out here doing this. Like if I'm sitting there thinking about where should I go, where's the spot? There's just something that kind of like, I don't know, comes within me and tells me like, go over here, try this.
It's also a way to help people going through a hard time.
My dad, when I was about 9, he went to a rehab when I was younger, and some of my older cousins, they brought me out fishing and stuff, and that helped me take my mind off all that negative stuff.
Ryan's cousin, at just 19 years old, is doing his part with making sure that the tradition lives on.
For me, if it's a tradition, I don't want it to die out. I want to keep it in the family as long as I can.
Just a little more than 100 miles down the road is the Oneida Nation. They too rely on ice fishing during the winter for food.
How important is it to learn these skills? And even just important to pass the skills down from generation to generation?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of our indigenous cultures is fish. Fish is a part of our diets, our seasonal diets, and so trying to make sure that we maintain those connections, whether we need to go out and subsistence fish or not, or if we can afford to buy fish. but I think it's always a good learning and good experience, trying to make sure that we maintain our cultural practices as well.
You know, with climate change seems to be there's a lot of melting going on. Has that directly affected you guys?
Our first ice fishing trip would always be during Christmas vacation. So uncles would, pick us up and we would go out and, spend the day out on the ice. But I know more recently it's at many times has not necessarily safe enough to go during Christmas time. So a lot of times you're looking further into January when ice is thick enough to get out there safely.
In the end, catching a fish can bring the tribes together and keep a tradition going for many generations to come.
If we're lucky enough, we get a good amount of fish that we can bring home and prepare for our family or friends or community.
In Wisconsin, Caitlin Onawa-Boycell, Indian Country Today.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. We'll be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.